Hey guys, tonight we step into the blistering, bone-shaking world of medieval blacksmithing. You're not watching a forge documentary here. You're standing in it. Right now, you're squinting through thick plumes of soot, your ears ringing from hammer strikes, and every inch of your skin sticky from sweat. The air tastes like molten iron and regret. Welcome to your new life. It's loud. It's hot. And yes, it absolutely smells like burning. You thought blacksmiths were just bearded guys in tunics making swords for knights? Think again. Most of your work won't be glorious at all. You're hammering nails, chains, hinges, horseshoes, occasionally a dagger if you're lucky. And even then, no one will say thank you. They'll probably say, "Why is this one heavier than the last one?" Then throw it at your foot. Also, you probably won't survive this, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at the forge just after dawn. The dew still clings to the cobbles and your fingers are too stiff to hold a hammer properly. It doesn't matter. You're expected to work anyway. The smithy is already radiating heat. Leftover warmth from yesterday's fire still smolders in the hearth. You stoke it back to life with bellows that creak like old knees. Then feed it handfuls of charcoal until flames leap up like they're glad to see you. They're not. Your tools are brutally simple: a hammer, an anvil, some tongs, and your own 2 hands. Hands already rough enough to sand with just by holding it. There's no magic switch. No gloves with gel padding. You just start. Every clang feels like a drumline in your skull. The vibration shoots through your wrist, up your elbow, and into a place in your spine you didn't know could hurt. Congratulations. It's not even 7 a.m. Historically, blacksmiths held an oddly crucial yet thankless position in town life. You weren't a peasant. But you weren't nobility either. You were part artisan, part technician, part human furnace. People needed you. But they didn't exactly respect you. At best, you were tolerated. At worst, feared. There was something about a man who could shape metal with fire that made folks uneasy. Which is rich, considering they asked you to fix literally everything. Your forge doubles as a repair shop, tool factory, and town complaint center. People wander in asking for horseshoes, hinges, sword repairs, cooking pots, axes, gate latches, even nails. Nails. Like, by the dozen. You'd think they'd invent a bulk discount. Spoiler alert, they didn't. But if one snapped in half, you were the villain. One mainstream historical fact. Blacksmiths were considered skilled laborers whose knowledge of metallurgy placed them above most manual workers. Yet their living conditions rarely matched that status. Your house might be attached to the forge. That sounds nice until you realize it means you're always working, always breathing in fumes, and constantly finding soot in your soup. Here's your first quirky tidbit: medieval blacksmiths used urine to quench metal. Yep. Not water. Not oil. Pee. It was cheap, available, and believed to help harden steel. So next time you think your job stinks, well, there's literally did, and of course, historians still argue whether smiths were seen as sacred artisans or borderline sorcerers. In some villages, your work was so mystical that locals whispered about demons helping you at night. In others, the priest simply blessed your tools twice a year and hoped for the best. The rhythm of your day is relentless. Heat. Hammer. Cool. Repeat. There's no break unless the fire goes out. And that would be a disaster. Keeping the forge alive is like feeding a monster. One that sleeps just long enough for you to stop panicking, then demands more fuel and attention. And if your arm isn't sore yet, don't worry. It will be. Tomorrow. And the day after that. And every day until you either die or become a legend, and you probably won't become a legend, because as hard as you work, your name won't be carved into history. No plaque on a church wall. No scroll of honor. Just the clink of your hammer echoing long after you're gone, and maybe a horseshoe left nailed to someone's barn door. Still, for now, you're standing in that fire-lit room. Sparks dancing like fireflies. Steel glowing orange on the anvil. And a small, stubborn part of you feeling oddly proud. This is your forge. Your fire. Your life. You weren't born a blacksmith. No one is. You started as something far more prestigious, the kid who sweeps the floor and occasionally gets yelled at for breathing too close to hot metal. Welcome to your apprenticeship. It's not glamorous. It's not even paid. It's 7 years at minimum, filled with getting calluses in places you didn't know had skin and learning to tell the temperature of iron by the color it glows. Not by any scientific method, just vibes and the occasional burn. You were probably around 12 when your parents sent you off to the local smithy. Not because you showed promise, but because you were the spare child. The one who wasn't needed to till fields or inherit land. So now, here you are, living in a tiny loft above the forge, eating whatever the master blacksmith feeds you, usually porridge and passive aggression, and sleeping just far enough from the fire to avoid burns, yet close enough to sweat through every dream. Your days begin before sunrise. You wake stiff, sore, and covered in coal dust even though you bathed yesterday. Somehow. That's the magic of soot, it multiplies. You stumble down the ladder to start your daily duties. Sweeping ash. Hauling fuel. Cleaning tools. And trying very hard not to drop anything. Especially not the tongs. If you drop the tongs, you get a lecture about discipline that somehow lasts longer than your lunch break. Mainstream historical fact. Apprenticeship was the standard pathway to any skilled trade in the Middle Ages, and blacksmithing was no exception. You had to complete years of training before even dreaming of becoming a journeyman, let alone a master. Guilds enforced it. Tradition enforced it. Your master. He mostly enforced it by grunting and throwing bits of scrap iron in your general direction. Your job isn't to make anything fancy yet. You're the backup bellows pumper, part-time gopher, and full-time observer. You spend hours watching the master heat, hammer, and quench. You take mental notes while pretending your feet aren't on fire from standing so close. You memorize the sound of good iron. The way it bends, and the hiss when it hits the quench bucket. You learn to listen to the metal, even if all it ever says is, "I'm hot and I hate you." Fringe tidbit. Some masters used hot metal to test apprentices' reflexes, literally. They'd toss glowing scraps at the floor to see if you jumped fast enough. Educational? Maybe. Sadistic? Almost definitely. But hey, congrats. You've just passed your first real lesson. Fear is a great motivator, you don't get weekends. That's not a thing. The forge runs 6 days a week, and Sundays are for church and guilt. Your one real break is the feast of Saint Eligius, the patron saint of metalworkers, when you might get a half day off and a slightly nicer meal. And even then, your master will probably spend the afternoon grumbling about how young folks don't respect the craft anymore. During this stage, you're not really allowed to touch the good tools. You're given a small hammer, a warped pair of tongs, and a block of iron so uneven it could double as a doorstop. Your first projects. Nails. So many nails. It's like medieval origami, but with more fire and more disappointment. Most of your early nails are either too fat, too thin, or somehow both at once. You don't even know how that's possible, but your master assures you it is. Historians still argue whether apprentices lived with their masters as part of a family or were treated more like indentured servants. In truth, it varied wildly. Some apprentices were practically adopted sons. Others were barely one rung above the village stray dog. You're somewhere in between. Occasionally given real food, but still expected to smile while carrying 40 pounds of coal up a hill. You get used to the sound of metal. The way it rings when struck just right. The almost musical tone of a well-shaped horseshoe or the dull clunk of a failed attempt. Your ears become finely tuned. And your hands, burnt and blistered though they are, start to learn their own rhythm. Even your mistakes become lessons. That time you dropped a nail into the quenching bucket and splashed your master. Educational. Painful. But educational, and while no one writes songs about apprentices, you begin to understand the forge in ways no outsider ever could. You learn how to judge temperature by eye. You understand the delicate dance between heat, force, and timing. You know when the fire needs more fuel just by the way the smoke curls. You dream of becoming a journeyman. Of having your own set of tools. Maybe even a name on the sign one day. But for now, you work. Quietly. Relentlessly. You try not to cough too hard when the smoke gets bad. You nod respectfully at your master even when he's wrong. And you keep hammering those terrible nails, hoping that one day, just maybe, you'll make something that doesn't look like it was cursed, and as the day ends, you drag yourself upstairs. Arms limp. Eyes gritty. Lungs full of forge dust. But you fall asleep fast. Not because you're content, but because you are exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't question. And tomorrow, you'll wake to do it all again. You wake coughing. Not a dainty little throat clear, but a full body, chest-rattling hack that sounds like you've swallowed half the forge. The room is pitch black except for a sliver of gray light leaking through a crack in the shutters. You're lying on a straw-stuffed mattress that might once have been soft, back when woolly mammoths still roamed the earth. Every breath tastes faintly of iron and ashes. Welcome to morning number. You've stopped counting, there's no fresh air in here. Not unless you count mildly less smoky as fresh. Your bed is tucked above the forge, which means sleeping with the lingering warmth of yesterday's fire and the stench of centuries of sweat baked into every beam. You blink the soot from your eyes and sit up slowly, your spine protesting like a rusted hinge. Breakfast? If you're lucky, it's leftover bread with the structural density of a small brick and a skin of something that may or may not be cheese. You trudge downstairs, your feet already sore before they even touch the floor. The forge hasn't been lit yet, but it's still warm. It never truly sleeps. You reach for the bellows and start pumping. With each breath of air, the embers glow brighter, redder, angrier. Soon they're hot enough to singe your eyebrows if you lean in too close. Which you do. Because the tongs slipped again. Because of course they did. Let's talk about mornings as a blacksmith. There's no gentle easing into the day. No sunrise yoga. No coffee. No catching up on medieval scrolls with inspirational quotes. There's just fire, ash, smoke, and the sound of your stomach complaining about that brick bread breakfast. You sweat before you work. You sweat during. You sweat after. And then you sweat again while wondering why your shirt is still wet from yesterday. Mainstream historical fact. Most blacksmiths worked from sunup to sundown, especially in busy market towns. Their forges often doubled as homes. That meant no separation between life and labor. You worked where you lived. You lived where you coughed. You begin the day's first task, sharpening plowshares. They're heavy. They're awkward. And they hate you. You set one on the anvil, heat it until it glows, then hammer the edge like your entire reputation depends on it. Which it does. A farmer who loses a morning because his plow cracks will absolutely storm back into your forge with the fury of a man whose turnips are on the line. The soot gets into everything. Your eyes. Your ears. Your food. You once found soot between your toes. You weren't even barefoot. It's an omnipresent, powdery reminder that nothing you own will ever be clean again. And don't even try to wash your clothes. Soap is expensive. Water barely helps. You'd be better off just embracing the grime like a new skin. Quirky tidbit. Some blacksmiths believed spitting on iron before quenching it brought luck or improved strength. Others thought it offended the spirits of the forge. So naturally, no one agreed and everyone spit anyway. Just in case, as you work, the noise becomes your soundtrack. The clang of hammer on metal. The whoosh of bellows. The hiss of iron hitting water. It's rhythmic, almost hypnotic. You slip into a trance, each strike a heartbeat, each motion automatic. And that's when you forget to blink. Your eyes sting. You wipe them with a soot-slick sleeve. Bad choice. Now you're half blind and still holding red-hot iron. Lunch is whenever you remember to eat, and it's usually cold. You grab it between tasks, perched on a barrel or sitting on a step outside the forge, trying to find a patch of shade that doesn't smell like burning hoof. Bread again. Maybe an onion. Once, a bit of pork. That was a good day. It lasted 10 minutes. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths had higher social standing than other tradesmen due to their essential role in military production. Sure, you made weapons. But you also fixed chamber pots. Try flexing that when someone asks what you do for a living, you finish the plowshares and move on to horseshoes. Each one is shaped precisely, heated, curved, punched, and quenched. Then it's on to nails, hinges, locks, more nails, a cooking pot someone cracked trying to stew 3 chickens in one go, and a mysterious bent piece of iron someone swears was a gate part. You nod like you understand. You don't. You fix it anyway. By afternoon, the air inside the forge is thick enough to chew. You've taken off your outer tunic, rolled up your sleeves, and still feel like you're being slow roasted. Your skin glistens with a mix of sweat and soot, and every breath feels like inhaling through a warm wool sock. Evening doesn't bring relief. It just shifts the misery to new joints. Your shoulders ache. Your arms tremble. Your knees sound like they're chewing gravel. But the work isn't done until the fire dies. Even then, you spend another hour scraping ash, cleaning tools, and resetting the forge for tomorrow. You finally sit, not because you want to, but because your body refuses to keep standing. Outside, the sun sets behind a haze of forge smoke and village chimney trails. You drag yourself back upstairs, peel off your filthy tunic, and collapse into bed. You smell like a chimney. You taste like a horseshoe. You're already dreading the sound of morning bellows, but there's a strange pride buried in all that filth. A small, stubborn voice that whispers you did this. You made things today. You survived fire. You can't afford anything. Not really. That's the joke nobody tells you when you dream of becoming a master blacksmith someday. Sure, everyone says it's a respectable trade. You make tools, weapons, armor, locks, keys. Basically everything that keeps the town from collapsing into a pile of splinters and chaos. And yet, somehow, your anvil is worth more than you are. Let's take inventory. Your hammer. Hand-forged by someone you'll never meet, possibly passed down from your master. It's heavy, slightly off balance, and chipped from years of abuse. The anvil is the crown jewel. A properly made anvil in the Middle Ages could cost the equivalent of several months' wages. It's solid iron. Weighs more than your sleeping apprentice, and if anyone steals it, you're not chasing them. You're just giving up. You glance around your forge. The tongs, bellows, chisels, hardy tools, files, and swages, all of it adds up. And don't forget the fuel. Charcoal isn't cheap, and you burn through it faster than a night running up an alehouse tap. You've done the math. If you were to sell everything in your smithy, you might be able to buy a modest house. Just not the tools to make nails for that house. Irony, forged and delivered, mainstream historical fact. Medieval blacksmiths did have higher earnings than many peasants, but their costs were astronomical. Maintaining a forge, purchasing iron and charcoal, paying guild dues, possibly feeding an apprentice, each of these meant living on a financial knife's edge. You weren't starving, but you were always one broken bellows away from ruin. You remember when a local lord came in asking for a dozen iron hinges. Nothing fancy. Just standard gate hinges. You quoted a fair price. He laughed, offered half, then added that it was either your deal or the dungeon. You took the deal. You also threw in a few nails, because you like breathing. Your pay comes in coin sometimes. Other times in eggs. Or wool. Or a chicken that clearly wants you dead. Barter is common, especially when the local economy gets tight. A farmer can't pay for a new scythe blade, but he'll trade you a sack of potatoes and a wheel of hard cheese that might double as a murder weapon. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some towns, blacksmiths weren't allowed to charge clergy members full price. Something about divine service discounts. So, when the local monk needs a new bell clapper, you're doing it for grace and exposure. Mostly exposure to not being excommunicated, and yet, you keep going. Because your forge is more than your job. It's your lifeline. You know how to stretch a coin. You reuse scrap iron like a miser hoards pennies. You mend your own boots, stitch your own tunics, and cook soup with ingredients that probably qualify more as suggestions than actual food. You'd kill for salt. But not enough to buy any. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths leaned more toward artisan or merchant class. You exist somewhere in the gray space between both. Vital yet undervalued. Skilled yet underpaid. You don't fit neatly into any social box. Except maybe the one labeled works too hard, gets too little. One of the more infuriating realities. Your clients have no idea what anything costs to make. They assume iron just appears in usable chunks. They don't see the hours spent stoking the fire, shaping the piece, cooling it slowly to avoid brittleness, or remaking it entirely because they changed their mind. You once had a merchant ask for a new lock design, then claimed the old one was better after you'd already delivered the new one. He offered good word of mouth as compensation. You smiled. Outwardly. But still. Despite the low margins and endless expenses, there's something strangely grounding about the forge. Maybe it's the predictability. Iron in. Fire. Hammer. Shape. Cool. Done. You don't need faith, luck, or charm to make things here. Just skill, sweat, and enough patience to avoid punching a customer who thinks swords should be lighter like in the songs. You've developed little rituals to stay sane. Wipe the anvil 3 times before the first strike. Touch the hammer handle to the forge door before starting a new piece. Stir the quench barrel counterclockwise. Are they useful? Maybe not. But they keep your world ordered. Especially when the rest of it isn't. Night falls again. And you're counting coins by firelight. Not many. Enough to buy more fuel. Maybe an onion. You wrap them in a scrap of cloth and tuck them beneath your mattress. Not because you're worried someone will steal them. But because you're worried you'll forget you have them. That's where you are now, grateful to remember a few copper pieces you earned for fixing a broken cartwheel that splintered because someone ignored your warning about overloading it. The forge still glows faintly, even after you've banked the fire. It never really dies. Just simmers quietly, like your hope that next month might be easier. That you'll get a better commission. That someone will pay what the work is worth. That you'll fix something for someone who says, "Thank you," and actually means it, but until then, you'll keep swinging the hammer. You'll keep patching holes in your tunic with wire and stubbornness. And you'll keep hoping your anvil never breaks. Because if it does, you won't be able to afford a new one. And no one pays for bent nails made on a barrel top. It starts with the bell. Not a majestic cathedral bell tolling with grace, but a dented iron lump hanging from a splintered beam outside your forge. Someone's whacked it with a stick, probably because they've broken something again. You sigh, already knowing it's going to be a long day. Today's jobs: a church bell repair, 3 plowshares, 6 horseshoes, a kitchen knife regrind, and of course, someone wants a sword. Not a real sword. A ceremonial one for their cousin's wedding. You'll be paid in dried apples and the vague promise of future work. The forge roars to life. You start with the bell. It's cracked, which means it won't ring true. It won't resonate like it should. There's a technique to this. Heat it slowly. Don't force it. Let the metal tell you where it's weak. The clang of hammer against iron is more careful here, more rhythmic. Like coaxing the bell back to life, not bullying it. If you do it wrong, the whole thing could shatter, and you'll be out half a month's income. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval blacksmiths weren't just metal workers banging blindly at anvils. They were versatile craftsmen responsible for a vast range of iron goods. Weapons, sure. But also door hinges, nails, cooking pots, sickles, locks, keys, and yes, church bells. The entire town depended on you, even if they didn't act like it. Next, plowshares. Thick, heavy blades that need sharpening and shaping. You grunt as you hoist one onto the anvil. Sparks fly as you hammer the red-hot edge into form. The repetitive clang becomes a kind of meditation. You think you could do this blindfolded now, though you probably shouldn't try. Your apprentice stands nearby, wide-eyed and sooty. You let him hold the tongs. He immediately drops them. The iron skids across the floor with a metallic screech. You don't yell. You just hand him the broom. Again. Then come the horseshoes. Each one needs to match the hoof it'll go on. Size, curvature, and nail holes all must be exact. You've memorized the hooves of half the town's horses. You shape the iron, hammer it round, punch nail holes. The forge flashes orange. You quench the finished shoe with a hiss that fills the room like an exhale. Now the knife. A butcher brought it in, blade chipped from splitting bone. You grind it smooth on a whetstone, then heat it to reshape the edge. It's not glamorous work, but the butcher pays in smoked meat. You like smoked meat. And finally, the sword. It's not for battle. It's for ceremony. Something shiny for a merchant's cousin to wave around before dancing and drinking too much mead. Still, you take pride in it. You select a narrow bar of iron, heat it to glowing, and begin drawing it out, shaping the blade with long, even strikes. The tang forms. The spine strengthens. You bevel the edge just enough to look sharp without actually slicing through someone's best tunic. Quirky tidbit. Some blacksmiths secretly stamp their initials onto items even when forbidden by guilds, just to feel like their work might outlive them. You've done it once or twice, hiding a tiny X where no one looks. It's the only signature you're allowed. You spend the rest of the day finishing details. Filing edges. Punching holes. Rewrapping the forged tongs with thin leather because they've worn down to bone. Your hands throb. Your back feels like it's filled with gravel. But the pile of finished goods grows, and for a moment, that feels like something close to pride. Historians still argue whether blacksmithing was seen as an honorable calling or just a necessary labor. Some towns held their smiths in esteem, considering them craftsmen and problem solvers. Others treated them like glorified tool vendors. You've experienced both. Sometimes you're the hero who fixed the broken cart axle. Sometimes you're the villain who charged 2 pennies for a nail too long by half a thumb. Late evening settles. You lay the finished sword gently on a cloth. Polished, balanced, a ceremonial weapon worthy of a small-town wedding. You know the merchant will pretend he made it himself. You also know his cousin will swing it wildly and probably hit a roast pig. You don't care. It's a beautiful blade. You made it, you clean up slowly. Each tool goes back in its place with the precision of a ritual. You bank the fire. Wipe your brow. Flex your fingers to make sure they still move. The apprentice is asleep in a corner, face down on a pile of rags. You let him stay there. He'll wake up coughing, but that's part of the job. Outside, the town is quiet. Stars peek through a haze of forge smoke and chimney soot. You stand in the doorway, arms folded, feeling like part of something bigger. Not because anyone thanked you, but because your work speaks in steel, and steel is loud. Your fingertips sting. Your shoulders groan. But tomorrow, someone will knock on that crooked bell again. Something else will be broken. Something else will need forging, and you'll do it. Because this is what you do. You don't remember the last time you heard silence. Not real silence. Not the deep, still kind that lets your thoughts drift like leaves on a pond. No, your world is a symphony of hammer blows, fire crackle, metal squeals, and bellows that groan like a constipated ox. And your neighbors? They hate it. All of it. At least twice a week, someone stomps up to your forge, scowling like they've bitten into a bad apple, and complains about the noise. Does it have to be so early? They say, while standing there in a perfectly intact pair of hinges you made for their front door. Can't you hammer a little quieter? Sure. Right after you teach fire to whisper and anvils to hum lullabies, you're not trying to be a nuisance. But iron doesn't care about sleep schedules. It glows when it wants. It bends when it's ready. And if you hesitate, it punishes you. So the clanging starts at dawn. It has to. There's work to do, and customers who somehow expect silent blacksmithing as if you're crafting swords from moonlight and dreams. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval towns were not quiet places. Markets buzzed. Livestock screamed. Church bells rang constantly. Tradesmen like you filled the air with the clangs and crashes of a working economy. Still, blacksmiths often got singled out. You were hard to ignore. Your noise echoed off stone walls. It rattled windows. It interrupted sermons. In fact, some towns even made ordinances restricting blacksmithing to certain hours. Nothing ruins a prayer like someone flattening a horseshoe next door. You've tried being subtle. You lined the anvil with straw to dampen sound. That didn't work, it just smelled like scorched hay. You closed the forge door. You nearly passed out from the smoke. You even tried working during off hours, but then clients complained their gear wasn't ready fast enough. So now you just smile through clenched teeth and let the hammer sing. Today, one of your more dramatic neighbors accuses you of shaking her baby awake every morning. You apologize politely, then mentally add her to the list of people you're definitely not fixing a gate for in the next century. Then there's the opposite type. The friendly neighbor who only shows up when they need something. They'll walk in with a broken rake or a dented cauldron and start with, "I hate to ask, but..." Which is a lie. They love to ask. They just hate to pay. You fix their stuff anyway. Because you live here too. And because the blacksmith isn't just a noisemaker. You're part of the fabric. If a hinge breaks, they call you. If a farmer's plow snaps mid-field, he'll ride through the night to your door. And when their daughter gets married, they'll ask you for a horseshoe blessed by the forge to bring luck. You'll give it to them. You always do. Quirky tidbit. In some villages, blacksmiths were also expected to pull teeth. Yes, teeth. Because you had strong arms, metal tools, and a fire to sterilize things. Never mind the fact you specialized in iron, not molars. Nothing says multitasking like pulling a rotten tooth with tongs meant for sword hilts. Despite everything, you try to be neighborly. You let kids peek into the forge, from a safe distance. You fix tools without grumbling too much. You deliver repaired items early, even when it means staying up late. But still, your name circulates in town gossip. Too loud. Too busy. Too. Blacksmith. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were feared or respected more. Some accounts suggest smiths were half magician, half mechanic. Men who shaped metal with fire, which felt like sorcery. Others describe them as gruff and unwelcome, tolerated only because they were necessary. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. You are needed, but rarely appreciated. You finish sharpening a scythe blade and step outside. The neighbor from earlier glares at you while hanging laundry. Her sheets flap in the breeze like surrender flags. You nod politely. She doesn't nod back. That's fine. Back inside, you resume hammering. Sparks fly. Smoke billows. Your apprentice coughs in the corner but keeps fanning the coals. You admire the way he's stopped complaining. He's learning. Maybe one day he'll take over the forge. Maybe he'll be the one people complain about. That thought makes you smile. Evening rolls in. The streets quiet down. You're still hammering. Not because you have to. But because this last piece, a gate latch for a widow who always brings you soup, is worth getting right. You file the edges smooth. Tap the shape just so. Dunk it in the quench bucket with a hiss. Later, as you close up, someone walks by and mutters, "Finally, some peace." You don't respond. You just run your fingers across the day's work, lined up neatly by the wall, still warm from the forge. Peace doesn't always mean quiet. Sometimes it means knowing you made things today. That you bent chaos into order with heat and force. That you kept the town running, no matter how loud you had to be. There are no gauges. No thermometers. No digital displays telling you when the iron is ready. All you have is your eyes, your instinct, and the very real chance of getting it wrong. Welcome to the science of guessing. You stare into the forge, watching the color of the metal shift like a stormy sky. It goes from deep red to orange, then yellow-white if you've really pushed it. That color isn't just pretty. It's your only clue. Too cool, and the metal cracks. Too hot, and it burns, turns brittle, or melts entirely. There's no second chance. You don't get to undo a ruined blade. You just start over, with less material and a worse mood. You've learned the rules, but no one ever wrote them down. Heat until it glows like sunrise, not like lightning. Strike when the steel sings, not when it hums. Quench when the edge looks soft, not when it feels soft. Because by the time you feel it, it's already too late. The forge doesn't teach with words. It teaches with scars. Mainstream historical fact. Pre-modern blacksmiths operated entirely by experience and sensory cues. The skill of heat judging by color and behavior was passed from master to apprentice, with no written standards. Modern metallurgists study what you do with machines. You just do it with your face too close to the fire and your sleeves slowly catching on fire again. Today's project is a chisel. Should be simple. But the iron bar you've been given is odd. Too soft in one place. Too brittle in another. Probably poor quality ore. Still, you work with what you have. You heat it. Wait. Wait more. Then strike. The metal flattens obediently at first. But halfway through, a hairline crack spiders down the side like it's mocking you. You pause. Inspect. Consider tossing it into the discard pile. But you don't. You reheat. Reinforce the tang. Adjust your blows. The chisel survives. Barely. Not your finest work, but it'll hold. Probably. Your apprentice asks, how do you know when it's ready? You want to answer something wise. Instead, you say, you don't. You just guess better with practice. Which is the truth, really, quirky tidbit. Some smiths used animal sounds to describe metal temperatures. Pig heat was dull red. Rooster heat was bright yellow. Dragon's breath meant white hot. And that also meant you'd better hurry or lose the piece entirely. It wasn't scientific, but it stuck. Later, you're tasked with repairing a cracked axe head. The split runs halfway down the blade. You could weld it closed, but that risks softening the edge. You could reinforce it with a steel collar, but that adds weight. You stand there. Dirty thumb rubbing your chin, mentally running through every failure you've ever had. Then you sigh and choose a middle path, a light weld with extra grinding. It holds. It might even outlive the axe handle. Historians still argue whether early blacksmiths understood the molecular structure of metal or just stumbled into brilliance through repetition. You know the answer. It's both. You don't need to know the word carbon to feel when steel turns wrong. You don't need to name the grain to see it tear, and when things go wrong, they go wrong fast. You once ruined a dagger by quenching it too soon. Heard a sharp ping as the blade cracked like thin glass. The buyer never noticed. You sanded it smooth, polished it bright, and made very sure they never tested it. But you still think about that sound. You still dream it sometimes, so much of your work is invisible. The difference between a perfect sword and a ruined one might be a single heartbeat's hesitation. A pause too long. A spark missed. There's no applause when you get it right. Just silence. Function. A gate that swings smoothly. A tool that cuts clean. A lock that clicks instead of jamming. Today, a traveling merchant asks for a set of matching hinges. He wants them fast. He wants them cheap. And he wants them all exactly the same. You nod politely while your brain screams. Identical hinges without a template. In 2 days. Sure. Right after you invent the printing press and a way to clone your hands, still, you get to work. You mark out measurements with charcoal. You match the curves by sight. You double-check each bend against the first one, holding the glowing iron like a baker checking cookie shapes. Except the cookies are 900 degrees and will sear your fingerprints off. Eventually, you finish them. They're not perfectly identical, but they're close enough to fool a casual glance. You wrap them in burlap and hand them over. The merchant grunts, flips a coin at you, and walks away. You don't bother checking if it's short. It always is. You sit down on the stump outside the forge, fingers twitching from the day's work. The evening light glints off the tools hanging on the wall. Each one was made by guesswork. Each one shaped by failure and stubbornness. And yet, they work. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. Not to the clang of metal, but to the silence that follows it. You earn that silence. One guess at a time. The charcoal arrives just after sunrise, dumped in rough sacks by a boy who's far too cheerful for someone covered in soot. You thank him, hand over a copper coin, and drag the load into the forge. It's heavy, awkward, and somehow leaves a trail of black dust in every corner of the room, including places charcoal has no business being. For example, inside your boots, you open a sack. The scent hits immediately. Dry wood, ash, and something almost sweet, like roasted bark. It gets into your lungs. Into your hair. Into your teeth, somehow. You've eaten breakfast, but now it tastes like burnt campfire. Again, welcome to the real fuel of the medieval forge. Not magic. Not muscle. Charcoal. Charcoal is the lifeblood of your work. It burns hot, fast, and clean. Well, cleaner than raw wood, anyway. You shovel it into the hearth, watching the embers catch and bloom. The forge stirs to life, an ancient beast waking from slumber, eager for more, mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, charcoal was essential for blacksmithing. It reached the high temperatures needed to shape and weld iron. Ordinary firewood, by contrast, burned too cool and produced too much moisture. Blacksmiths either bought charcoal from dedicated burners, or if desperate, made it themselves by slow-burning wood in covered pits for hours or even days. You've tried making your own. Once. It was a disaster. The fire escaped the pit, smoked out the chickens, and left you with a pile of half-burnt logs and a very angry farmer who swore one of them looked like his missing rake, so now you buy it. And that means lugging it, bag after bag, through your forge, over your tools, and into the waiting mouth of the fire. Charcoal burns quickly. You go through it like a knight goes through armor polish. Faster than you can afford, and the dust. Oh, the dust. It clings to your skin like regret. It fills the wrinkles in your knuckles, coats the inside of your nostrils, and leaves streaks across your face that make you look like you've just escaped a chimney. You've long since stopped trying to stay clean. Clean is a fairy tale. You're aiming for less grimy than usual, quirky tidbit. Some smiths swore by specific kinds of wood for their charcoal. Oak for long burns. Birch for fast heat. Hazel if you needed a sharp edge. You're not entirely sure if that's science or superstition. But you nod knowingly anytime someone brings it up. Trade secrets are 50% confidence, 50% soot. You shovel more charcoal into the hearth. The flames leap higher. The forge glows like the eye of something ancient and hungry. You wipe sweat from your forehead and smear charcoal across your brow like a warrior's mark. Today's project is a wagon wheel rim. You've got to heat a long iron ring evenly, then fit it over the wooden wheel while it's still scorching hot. Timing is everything. Too slow, and the rim cools before you can mount it. Too fast, and the wood might catch fire. The trick is to lay the iron onto the wheel while still sizzling, just enough to expand and then contract, locking everything in place. You prep the wheel outside, wood soaked in water for safety. Then you heat the rim. It takes forever. The ring is huge. You use nearly half a bag of charcoal just to bring it to a dull orange. You haul it outside with tongs and a shout. Two helpers rush over. Together, you drop the glowing rim onto the wheel. It hisses. Steam erupts. The helpers jump back. The iron groans as it shrinks, gripping the wood like a snake around prey. It holds. You all cheer quietly, then go back to pretending it was easy. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths of your era fully understood thermal expansion, or just learned it through hard-won repetition. Either way, you know it works. Because sometimes you can feel the wood pulse beneath the iron as it tightens. It's not magic. It's just fire and timing. Afterward, you sit on the edge of the trough, sipping water that tastes faintly of smoke. You wipe your hands on a rag, which only redistributes the charcoal. You look like a soot-covered statue of yourself. Your apprentice arrives with more bags. You nod. He groans. He's learning. Not just how to hammer, but how to live in this world of fuel and flame. You teach him how to store the charcoal. How to keep it dry. How to gauge the right amount for different jobs. 1 scoop for nails. 2 for locks. 3 if you're feeling ambitious or foolish. You tell him the truth. You don't burn charcoal. You burn time. You burn effort. You burn pieces of your own life, one spark at a time. Night comes. The forge dies slowly, the fire settling into ash and embers. You sweep the dust into neat piles, though it will return tomorrow. It always does. You empty the last of today's charcoal onto the hearth, not to burn now, but to be ready for morning, because when the bell rings again, someone will want something. And you'll need the fire. The day starts like any other. A hammer. A hiss. A headache. But by midday, something changes. A strange stillness settles over the street. Fewer footsteps. Fewer voices. And then, the unmistakable sound you never want to hear, the wooden rattle of cart wheels on cobblestone, followed by coughing. Deep, wet coughing. The plague is back. No one says it outright. Not yet. But the signs are there. The merchant's wife hasn't opened her stall in days. The baker's youngest hasn't been seen at the well. And you overheard the priest whispering about black swellings. That's all you need to know, but the forge doesn't close. Because it can't, you've got orders backed up for weeks. A farmer still needs a new axe head. The reeve wants repairs on the church lock. And your apprentice? He's still showing up every morning, even though his eyes look a little glassier than usual and he's sweating more than the fire justifies. Mainstream historical fact. During plague years, blacksmiths, like most tradesmen, were expected to continue working unless directly infected. There were no lockdowns. No paid sick leave. You worked until you couldn't. And then you were replaced. You start working faster. Not because of deadlines, but because you don't know how much time you've got before someone in your house starts coughing too. You pour more charcoal into the forge. The heat feels aggressive now. It's like it's daring you to breathe too deeply. The bellows hiss and groan. You're hammering hinges for the apothecary's garden gate, which apparently needs to stay closed to keep the illness out. You don't argue. You just make the hinges. Outside, the cart rolls by again. This time slower. It's not empty anymore. There's a bundle wrapped in linen lying across it. You don't look too long. You've learned that lesson, quirky tidbit. In some towns, blacksmiths were asked to forge iron crosses or plague charms. These were amulets worn on the body or nailed above doors to ward off illness. You've been asked to make 3 this week. You don't believe in them. But you hammer the metal anyway. Something about it feels right. Your apprentice asks if he can leave early. Says his stomach hurts. You tell him to go. You tell him to rest. You don't say what you're thinking. Don't come back tomorrow. Not if you're sweating like that. Not if you're coughing already. You don't want to see it. You don't want to know, but you also don't want to be alone. Historians still argue whether the blacksmith's forge was safer or riskier during outbreaks. On one hand, the heat and smoke made it hard for disease to linger in the air. On the other hand, it brought in a constant stream of customers, each one a potential carrier. Either way, the danger was invisible. And it always walked through the front door. Later, a nobleman's servant arrives in a rush, holding a broken sword. Not just any sword. A family heirloom. The blade snapped at the hilt. He wants it reforged by tomorrow. It belonged to his grandfather, the servant says. He wants it buried with him. You glance up. The noble's not dead yet. But they're preparing. You work late into the evening. You file the broken edges, heat them carefully, and begin the long process of reforging. The metal doesn't want to rejoin. It remembers being whole. It resists. You hammer slowly, deliberately, coaxing it back into shape. When the weld takes, there's a strange moment of silence. It feels like the sword has exhaled. You polish it until it gleams. You wrap it in cloth. You don't ask who'll be carrying it home. Outside, the stars are hidden behind a fog of chimney smoke and worry. The street is too quiet. Even the dogs have stopped barking. You shut the forge door gently. Almost like you're afraid of waking something. You sit on your stool, fingers stained, shoulders sore, and think about the people who came in today. Will they come back tomorrow? Will they still be breathing? You don't know. All you can do is keep the fire going. Keep shaping iron. Keep showing up, because the forge doesn't close. Not for rain. Not for winter. Not even for death. You know who never worries about the cost of an anvil? A knight. Or a baron. Or a merchant with a banner embroidered in gold thread. They walk into your forge, sword dangling from their hip, boots cleaner than your drinking water, and demand steel. Not just any steel. Their steel. Custom. Polished. Perfect. You say yes. Of course, you say yes. Today it's a nobleman's steward, standing in your doorway with an expression that says he'd rather be anywhere else. He produces a wrapped bundle, which unfolds into a badly dulled sword. You suppress a sigh. It's not chipped, not bent. Just poorly maintained. Probably used once to slice bread, then sat in a scabbard for 6 months while its owner bragged about battle readiness. He wants it sharpened, polished, engraved, and ready by dawn. For an important occasion. You want to ask if this important occasion involves actual combat or just parading through the market square. But you don't. You nod. You name a fair price. He blinks, snorts, then names a lower one. Much lower, you accept. Again, mainstream historical fact. Blacksmiths in medieval towns were often required, by social expectation or outright feudal obligation, to prioritize work for the local nobility or town officials. You were paid, yes. But rarely what your work was worth. And always with the knowledge that refusing could cost you more than a client, you heat the sword. Gently. The metal resists. Like it knows it's about to be manhandled. You begin the grind. Slow, careful passes on the stone. Then the polish. Then the edge. While you work, your mind wanders. You remember the last time you forged a blade from scratch for someone like this. A full week of labor. Steel folded again and again. Quenched just right. Balanced so it could slice through air. The knight took it, nodded once, and said it felt light. You never saw him again. But the next month, someone brought it back, broken at the hilt. Apparently it snapped while he was fencing. With a tree. Quirky tidbit. Some blacksmiths forged imperfections deliberately into noble weapons. Minor flaws, invisible to the eye, but enough to keep the blade from being too good. Why? Because no one wants a noble thinking he doesn't need the smith. You want them to come back. You want them dependent. But not grateful. They don't do grateful. Today's sword turns out better than expected. The edge shines. The balance feels right. You even add a simple engraving. A line of vine work along the fuller. It'll look expensive, even if it isn't. As you wrap it in cloth, you hear laughter outside. The steward is talking to another servant about the hammer monkey. You realize, after a moment, they're talking about you. You hand over the sword. He doesn't say thank you. Just grunts, tosses you a coin, and leaves. The coin is short. Again, historians still argue whether blacksmiths were truly free in feudal systems or bound by obligation to their lords. You know how it works. You're free to work for whoever you like. So long as you always make room for the ones with money, power, and enough land to bury you where no one will look. And it's not just nobles. Soldiers come in, too. Their swords chipped from skirmishes or practice or just being dropped too often. Some are nervous. Some bark orders. Some try to impress you by talking about how tough their last battle was. You nod, smile, and file down the nicks they made from hitting a rock. You're not afraid of their weapons. You're afraid of what they can do without them. One soldier once threatened to test a new edge on your apprentice when he thought a blade felt too dull. You offered to test it on his boot instead. He laughed. You didn't. You still made the blade. Later, a town guard stops by for a spearhead. Standard stuff. While you're fitting it to the shaft. He leans in and says, "You know, if you ever made extras." He lets the sentence dangle. You don't answer. You never do. You make what you're asked. Nothing more. Nothing less. Because when you make weapons, you're always dancing on the edge of politics. One wrong commission, and suddenly you're arming rebels or collaborating. And no one cares what the truth is when the hangman is called. As night falls, you clean the forge in silence. The tools are still warm from the day. Your fingers ache. Not from the labor, but from how tight you've held your tongue all day long, because you make weapons for people you fear. And you always will. You hear her before you see her. The sharp rhythm of boots on cobblestone, the creak of worn leather, and a voice calling out, clear and steady, "Smith. Are you in?" You step out from behind the forge and there she is. A woman in travel-stained clothes, cloak singed at the hem, eyes steady as steel. And in her arms, a sword, not a ceremonial one. Not a broken heirloom. This blade has been used. The edge is jagged. The fuller is scratched. The handle's leather grip is frayed where fingers clutched it tight, again and again. This is a weapon that's tasted life and loss. She places it on your anvil like she's putting down part of herself, mainstream historical fact. Though rare, women did work in medieval blacksmithing. Some inherited forges from fathers or husbands. Others were apprenticed as children and continued the trade on their own. And some, like the woman before you now, forged in other ways. On the road. In battle. In quiet resistance to every rule that said they shouldn't, you ask what she needs. She answers simply, a new edge. A sharper one. You don't ask why. You've learned not to. You just nod and begin. She watches as you heat the blade, eyes tracking every move. She's seen a forge before. Maybe worked in one. Maybe just watched someone she cared for do the same. You glance up once, meet her gaze, and see the faintest nod. She knows the rhythm, quirky tidbit. In some medieval guild records, women blacksmiths appear under the term faber, the Latin for smith, without gender distinction. But later documents scrubbed them out or reclassified them as assistants or relatives. History is noisy, but often edited by those who hate the sound of a woman's hammer. As the sword glows, you begin reshaping the edge. Not too fine. Not brittle. This isn't a dueling weapon. It's for survival. You taper the tip slightly, fix the balance, and file down the burrs with careful pressure. The blade hisses when you quench it, steam rising like a sigh between you. While you work, she paces. Not nervously. Purposefully. Her boots scuff the dirt floor. She checks the door twice. Listens. Says little. But when you finish and present the sword back to her, she takes it in both hands like it matters. Like it's something sacred, and then she pays. Fairly. In silver. No haggling. No smirking comments about how rare it is to see a woman with a blade. Just a quiet thank you. You nod back. Historians still argue whether women in the trades were a footnote or a foundation. Whether they were anomalies or just left out of the records. But you've seen enough to know. The forge doesn't care about gender. Fire tests everyone equally. After she leaves, your apprentice asks, was that really her sword? You shrug. It is now. That night, you sit by the forge, watching the coals dim to ash. You think about the way she held the sword. Like it wasn't just metal, but memory. Like it was protection, or promise, or both, and you think of the others. The women who came before her. The ones who worked in the shadows of their husbands or fathers. Who hammered quietly while others took credit. The ones who made nails and hinges and hope, and were never listed in any guild book. You imagine their names burned into the tools themselves, invisible but permanent. You reach for a small bar of iron, heat it slowly, and begin shaping a hairpin. Just for practice. Just for remembrance, because somewhere, someone else will come through your door. Unexpected. Quiet. Powerful. And when they do, you'll be ready. You're halfway through reshaping a broken gate latch when the church bells ring. Not the deep toll of a funeral. Not the bright jangle of a wedding. This is the odd, uneven clang of a feast day. Saint Eligius, if your memory's right. Patron saint of metalworkers. Supposedly, you pause, wipe your brow, and lean out of the doorway. Sure enough, the street is shifting. Shopkeepers are shuddering. Bakers tossing out yesterday's bread. A group of boys is tying ribbons to a cartwheel like it's suddenly sacred. Someone throws you a wink and says, even the hammers get a holiday. You're not convinced, mainstream historical fact. The church calendar ruled medieval life. Feast days, saints' days. Fast days. These dictated who worked, who rested, and when. Some feasts were mandatory. Others were merely suggested. And blacksmiths, being both essential and irritating, often found themselves caught between needing a break and needing to stay in business. You consider taking the day off. Just for a moment. Then you look at your order board. A dull sword, a missing horseshoe, and 3 nails promised before sundown. So you compromise. You skip lunch, keep working, and promise St. Eligius a slightly nicer candle at Mass next week. Still, the church shapes everything around you. Prices. Materials. Even the sounds. No bell you forge can be made without a blessing first. No iron cross you hammer can be sold without the parish priest waving a palm over it. You once made a weather vane shaped like a rooster and were asked to melt it down because someone said roosters were too prideful. You now make simpler shapes. Mostly arrows. Arrows don't offend anyone, quirky tidbit. Some blacksmiths believed that accidentally striking your thumb while forging on a feast day was a divine warning. You struck your thumb last week. It was a Tuesday. So if that's divine, it's poorly scheduled. Today a friar wanders in. His sandals are dusty. His robe hem is singed. He places a cracked censer on your bench. Can you fix it? He asks. You nod, though part of you wants to ask how sacred objects keep ending up scorched. Probably too much incense. Probably too much sermonizing. You heat the piece, working gently around the chains, patching the bowl with a slim iron band. As it cools, you polish it carefully, making sure it gleams. The friar watches in silence. Then, quietly, he says, you know, there's something holy in this place too. You raise an eyebrow, he continues. Fire refines. It tests. It changes what it touches. That's what we say about faith. But you live it here, every day. You don't respond. But later, when he's gone and the censer is cooling in the corner, you think about what he said. Not because you believe it, but because it feels true. Historians still argue whether craftsmen like you saw themselves as part of the sacred economy or just tolerated its rituals out of necessity. Did smiths revere saints? Or simply appease them? You've mumbled a few prayers over blades that felt risky. You've lit candles for apprentices when they were sick. And sometimes, yes, you whisper to the fire. In the afternoon, a boy brings by a donation box for the church. It's iron-bound, with the lock rusted shut. You crack it open and replace the hasp. He thanks you and offers a roll of bread. You take it. It's warm, and that's the strange balance of your life. Holy days don't stop your forge, but they do shape it. Priests ask for hinges. Nuns want candle holders. Monks need bells. You're part of their world, even if you spend more time with steel than with scripture. That night, as you bank the fire, you light a single taper near the door. A nod to Saint Eligius. Not a prayer. Not a vow. Just a gesture. One craftsperson to another, you watch the flame flicker for a moment, then return to your tools. Tomorrow, the bells will ring again. And you'll still be here, shaping metal between the cracks of faith and flame. The invitation comes not on parchment, but through a grumpy tanner holding a scrap of hide with soot-smudged writing. It's from the guild. Again, you groan, it's always the same. Meetings. Dues. Regulations. You wipe your hands on your apron and read the message aloud. All smiths are required to attend the quarterly gathering of the Worshipful Guild of Metal and Allied Trades. Attendance is mandatory. Refreshments not provided. Lovely, you close the forge early, bank the fire, and prepare yourself. You swap your work tunic for one with only some burn holes. You brush the soot from your beard as best you can and head to the guild hall, which smells like cold ale, wax, and old complaints. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval guilds were more than unions. They were regulatory bodies, fraternal networks, economic enforcers, and at times political bullies. They set prices, settled disputes, and controlled who got to call themselves a master. Joining one gave you protection. Refusing could end your career. You arrive and squeeze into a bench beside the farrier who always smells like hooves and vinegar. Across the hall, the armorers sit in a smug little knot, whispering about someone's subpar rivets. You try not to eavesdrop, but your ears are trained for the clang of bad forging and the clang of bad gossip. The guildmaster bangs a gavel. The meeting begins. First topic, dues. Always dues. They've gone up again. Something about imported iron costing more and supporting the Sacred Brick Restoration Fund. You sigh and hand over your coin. You'd rather be restoring your bellows. Second topic, apprentices. There's a new rule. No apprentices under 10. No working them past sunset. And no more unauthorized testing with hot tongs. You glance down the bench and see at least 3 smiths smirking. You smirk too. Not because it's funny, but because you once were the 10-year-old with a burn on your ear and a master who swore it was part of the learning curve. Third topic, quality standards. This part matters. The guild's name is on the line. If someone makes a blade that bends in a duel or a lock that jams during a break-in, the guild's reputation suffers. And if the guild suffers, everyone does. You nod along, already thinking about the plowshare you delivered last week. Solid. True. Unremarkable. Just the way it should be, quirky tidbit. Some blacksmith guilds were so strict they banned members from working by candlelight, claiming it produced inferior work. Others fined smiths for making foreign styles without permission. You once got a warning for experimenting with a Scandinavian axe head. It was sharper than any local blade. That, apparently, was the problem. Then comes the final topic, enforcement. This is the part no one likes to talk about. The part where the guild names someone who's been operating independently, outside of guild rules. Usually it's a traveler, or a stubborn village smith who thinks the rules don't apply if your forge is far enough from the town square. This time, it's old Harwick. The smith 3 miles east who sells nails too cheap and talks back to the inspector. They've docked his rights to sell in the marketplace. One more offense, and he's out. You don't cheer. You don't boo. You just sit there, feeling the iron bar of compliance pressing across your shoulders. Historians still argue whether guilds preserved quality craftsmanship or strangled innovation. You know they did both. They kept cheats from undercutting you. But they also kept prices high, creativity low, and your calendar full of pointless meetings. Afterward, the ale flows. Someone sings a song about a hammer that fell in love with a bellows. You stand by the wall, sipping slowly, wondering how many of these men actually love the forge or just the power it brings. You nod politely, slip out early, and walk home under a sky full of soot-gray stars. Back in the forge, everything is as you left it. Quiet. Warm. Honest, you stoke the fire just a little. Not to work, but to feel the heat again. You roll a bit of scrap between your fingers, watching the orange light dance across your knuckles. The guild is important. It protects you. Guides you. Controls you, but this, the sound of the fire, the smell of iron, the quiet pride of good work done right, this is what makes you a smith. It starts with a knock on your door. Hard. Impatient. And far too early. You pull on your soot-stained tunic, still half asleep, and open it to find a farmer holding a twisted lump of iron that once resembled a rake. It bent, he says. Twice. You take it from him, turn it in your hands, and try not to say what you're thinking, that it bent because he used it to dig through compacted clay and stones the size of loaves of bread. Instead, you nod and say, "I'll fix it." Because that's what you do. You fix things. Even when they're doomed to break again, you lay the piece on your bench, and there it is. Rust. Not just surface rust. Deep, pitted corrosion. The kind that laughs at your hammer and shrugs at your file. You sigh, rust never sleeps, mainstream historical fact. Iron, for all its strength, is annoyingly mortal. It rusts with moisture. It breaks under stress. It warps with heat and needs constant care. Medieval blacksmiths spent as much time repairing tools as forging new ones. And no matter how well you made something, rust always had the final word. You heat the rake head gently, trying to soften the metal without weakening it further. You file away the worst of the damage. You reinforce the base with a small iron collar, knowing it'll last at most a season. Maybe two, if he's gentle. He won't be. After the farmer leaves, you move to the next piece. A cooking pot with one leg broken off. It's old, patched 4 times already, and covered in a layer of rust so thick it crunches under your fingers. You scrape it clean, reattach the leg, and coat the whole thing in oil before heating it to seal the surface. A temporary fix. A rust delay, not a prevention. Quirky tidbit. Some smiths swore by bizarre rust prevention methods. They buried tools in straw-filled barrels, coated them with goose fat, or rubbed them with crushed garlic. You tried garlic once. Your apprentice refused to come near the forge for 2 days. You look around your shop. Half the items on your repair list are comebacks. Tools you made. Nails that bent. Hooks that cracked. Nothing lasts forever in iron. It fights you twice, once when you make it, and again when it breaks. Even the anvil you use has a chip in the corner. You've hammered around it for years. Replacing it would bankrupt you. So instead, you learn to adjust. That's the job. Adjustment. Iron teaches you how to lose gracefully. Historians still argue whether medieval metalwork was designed to last or simply meant to be serviceable and disposable. You suspect the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Some clients want things that endure. Others just want cheap. And even the best iron loses the fight eventually. A merchant comes in with a lock you made 6 years ago. It's rusted shut. He says it's your fault. You say nothing. You soak it in oil, heat it gently, and work the mechanism free. Inside, it's packed with dust, mouse droppings, and rust flakes. You clean it, refile the tumblers, and give it back. He grumbles and pays half the price you asked. You smile. Because you've learned that in this trade, no one remembers when something works. But they always remember when it breaks, and yet you keep making things. Why? Because every tool, every hinge, every blade, and each one carries a part of you. Even when it bends. Even when it rusts. Even when someone tosses it in a ditch and curses your name, because for a brief moment, that thing existed. It worked. It served. It meant something, and because, sometimes, something lasts, the knife you made for the baker's wife. Still sharp after 4 years, the hinges on the millhouse door. Still swinging, the horseshoe you nailed for a soldier's steed. He came back and thanked you. You didn't expect it. But you remember it. That night, you oil every tool in your forge. Slowly. Lovingly. As if to say, not yet. You're not done yet. You patch the corner of your apron with wire. You sharpen your file. You check the hammer handle for cracks. All small things. All part of the slow war against time and moisture. Rust may never sleep. But neither do you. You wake to the sound of your own teeth chattering. Not because of fear, but because the forge is cold. Freezing, actually. Your breath fogs in the morning light, and the floor of the shop feels like a sheet of ice wrapped in regret. Winter has arrived. You shuffle toward the hearth, wrapping your cloak tighter, fumbling for the tinderbox. Your fingers don't want to bend. You spark flint against steel until the tiny flame catches. Then you feed it kindling, then charcoal, then air. Always more air. The fire wakes slowly, reluctantly, as if it too wants to stay in bed, and then it's burning. Not hot enough yet, but angry. You hold your hands out, palms pink and shaking, and wait for sensation to crawl back into your fingers. Mainstream historical fact. For blacksmiths, winter wasn't just unpleasant. It was dangerous. Metal behaved differently in the cold. Brittle. Stubborn. More likely to crack or shatter. Iron that forged smoothly in summer could chip without warning in winter. And tools. They froze. Literally. You learn to keep your hammer close to the hearth or risk frostbitten handles. You glance at your order list, scrawled in charcoal on a plank near the door. There's no break for the season. Only new problems. Axes to sharpen. Stoves to repair. Ice picks to forge. Winter changes the shape of need. You start with a horseshoe. Simple. Routine. But as you hammer, you notice the difference. The iron feels harder. Less forgiving. You strike again. A sharp, clear ping. And just like that, a crack runs through the edge. You curse softly. Quirky tidbit. Some smiths believed winter iron had a mean spirit. They'd spit in the hearth or chant little rhymes before working, hoping to appease the metal. You don't believe in spirits. But today, you mutter one anyway. Just in case, you reheat the bar and try again, this time gentler. But your body's not at its best either. Your hands are stiff. Your shoulders ache. And your nose has started leaking with a dedication only rivaled by your apprentice's excuses. Speaking of which, he shows up late. Scarf wrapped to his eyes. Holding a pot of frozen lard like it's a holy relic, you nod. Lard is useful. On hinges. For quenching. For keeping tools from freezing solid. You melt some in a pot near the fire. The smell is memorable. The forge becomes your refuge. Outside, the wind slices through town like a blade. But inside, the fire roars. The iron glows. You sweat beneath 3 layers and your breath still fogs. But you feel alive. That said, everything takes longer. The bellows are stiff. The water in the quenching barrel has a film of ice. You have to break it each morning with an old hammer head. Once, you found a frog in there. It stared at you with a look that said, "Why?" Historians still argue whether blacksmiths slowed production in winter or simply adapted. You know the answer. No one can afford to stop. Winter doesn't pause hunger. It doesn't delay rent. It just adds new challenges and expects you to keep swinging. Later, a woman comes in with a cracked stoveplate. She's shivering. You don't ask questions. You just take it, reforge the joint, and wrap it in wool scraps when you hand it back. She presses a small coin into your palm and thanks you like you just saved her family. Maybe you did. As evening falls, the forge becomes a kind of cave. You sit close to the fire, rubbing oil into your hammer handle, listening to the hiss of water dripping onto the hot coals. You think about warmth. How rare it is. How easily taken for granted. You think about all the things heat gives you. Strength. Light. Life. You think about how fragile those things feel in winter, then you feed the fire one last scoop of charcoal, bank the coals, and stand in the quiet. You blow on your hands. Your breath fogs. The anvil gleams in the last glow of the forge. And for one brief, golden moment, it feels like summer in here. You pass them on the road sometimes. Dusty figures hauling carts, pushing broken wheelbarrows, carrying bags that rattle with metal. Traveling smiths. It's easy to envy their freedom. No roof to fix. No taxes to pay the guild. No neighbors banging on the door before sunrise, but then you see the frost on their cloaks, the cracked soles of their boots, the way they sleep beside ditches or in the shadows of stables. And suddenly, the envy fades. You've never wanted to be one of them. Yet today, you get a taste. A message arrived at dawn. Urgent repairs needed at the next village over. Their smith's been injured. No one else can fix the broken gate to the livestock pens. They're losing pigs. You could say no. But you remember what it felt like the last time your gate stuck in the winter, and how one good gust nearly cost you a week's worth of dried meat, so you pack your tools. Not all of them. Just the essentials. A hammer, tongs, chisels, file. Everything you can carry fits into a leather satchel that's far too heavy for its size. You cover the forge with a canvas sheet, leave a note for your apprentice, and start walking. Mainstream historical fact. While most smiths were tied to workshops, traveling blacksmiths existed throughout medieval Europe, especially in rural or developing areas. They were itinerant workers. Sometimes freelancers. Sometimes desperate. Moving from village to village. Offering their skills in exchange for coin, food, or a place to sleep. You learn quickly that the road is less romantic than it looks. Mud sucks at your boots. Every bump in the path sends your tools clanging like a portable percussion section. Your hands go numb. Your back starts muttering threats. You reach the village by late afternoon. It's smaller than you thought. No walls. Just a few cottages huddled around a church and a lean-to barn. You find the broken gate. A crude thing, made of twisted nails and hope. It's hanging by one hinge. The other side is held up by sheer optimism and a pile of hay. You get to work. Quirky tidbit. Some traveling smiths carried iron nails in their mouths to soften them with saliva, supposedly making them easier to drive into old wood. You try it once. Nearly choke. Never again. The job takes longer than expected. The iron hinge has sheared clean off. You have to reforge a new bracket using a borrowed fire pit and bellows that wheeze like a dying goat. The villagers bring charcoal and awkward smiles. One of them offers you a turnip. By dusk, it's done. The gate swings smooth. The pigs are confused but contained. You're paid in bread, ale, and a wool scarf that smells faintly of sheep and ash. You spend the night in a loft above the grain store. It's dry. Barely. You lie on a bed of straw with your satchel as a pillow. The stars peek through a crack in the roof. You listen to mice skittering overhead and wonder how anyone does this every day. Historians still argue whether itinerant smiths were respected or merely tolerated. You suspect they were welcomed when needed and forgotten just as fast. They were useful ghosts. Quiet fixes. Moving hands. The next morning, you trudge back. Legs aching. Head sore from too little sleep. A trader on the road mistakes you for a traveler and offers to buy your hammer. You refuse politely. Then less politely, when you return to your forge, the sight of it fills you with something unexpected, relief. The worn anvil. The bucket with a crack in the side. The ash pile no one swept. Home, you throw open the shutters. Your apprentice runs out and says he tried to make nails but accidentally made a fork, sort of. You tell him that's still a win. You hang your coat by the door, light the forge again, and feed it with careful hands. You're not a traveler. Not because you can't be. But because this space, with its heat, tools, and rhythm, it anchors you. Even when everything else in the world feels unsteady, and as the fire roars back to life, you whisper a quiet thanks to the scarf still wrapped around your neck. The smell of sheep hasn't faded. But the warmth, that stays. The morning starts with gossip. As always, two villagers stand just outside your open door, whispering like they don't know sound carries. Did you hear about Marta's boy? One says. Ran off with the merchant's daughter. Left nothing but a note and one of those iron heart pendants the smith makes. You smile, you didn't know they'd taken one of your pieces. But you remember making it. A quick commission for a nervous boy with sweaty palms and a very specific request. Something that says, like, not love exactly. But maybe someday. So you hammered out a small iron heart. Simple. A little crooked. Honest, and apparently, effective. Blacksmithing isn't just plowshares and swords. It's bits of quiet magic tucked into the everyday. A well-balanced kitchen knife. A perfectly swinging gate. A ring of keys for a new home. And sometimes, yes, a heart-shaped trinket meant to say what someone couldn't. Mainstream historical fact. In many towns, the blacksmith's forge was a hub of community life. More than just a workshop, it became a place where news was exchanged, favors were negotiated, and, surprisingly often, relationships were brokered. The smith wasn't just a tradesman. Sometimes, he was also the village's unofficial therapist. Today, it's a wedding, not yours, of course. But you're involved. The groom's mother arrives in a flurry of wool and nerves, asking. No, begging for help with a last-minute emergency. The ceremonial horseshoe is missing, you nod. Of course. You'd already started making a backup anyway. It's tradition for newlyweds to hang one above the door. For luck. For strength. And, depending on who you ask, fertility. You don't ask. You get to work, heating the iron just enough to curve it smoothly. You shape it carefully. Clean edges. Graceful bend. 2 tiny holes for nails. You polish it until it gleams. Then, for no charge, you wrap it in a square of cloth and hand it over. She cries a little. You pretend not to notice, quirky tidbit. In some regions, blacksmiths were considered good luck at weddings. So much so that brides would walk past the forge and touch the anvil on the way to the church. You've had people kiss your tongs before. You stopped asking why. As the day rolls on, more visitors come. A young woman needs a lock for her dowry chest. You offer 3 styles. She picks the plainest one, smiles shyly, and says, "He likes simple things." You nod. You know the type. A nervous father asks for a new knife. One that will scare off suitors. You hand him one that's just dull enough to be harmless, but intimidating enough to make a statement, and later that afternoon, a boy no older than 10 arrives with a crumpled note and a coin. The note reads, in childish scrawl, "Please make 1 iron ring. Not big. Not fancy. For her." You don't ask who. You just make the ring. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths played a social role or if stories of matchmaking and wisdom are just nostalgic fiction. But you've seen it happen. You've helped mend more than iron. You've watched people confess, apologize, propose, all while holding something you made. You once forged a key for a couple who eloped in the night. They brought you wine 2 years later and a toddler who tried to eat your apron. You forged a pendant for a girl who was moving away. Her brother still wears a matching one around his neck like a charm. You made a simple knife for a widow, and she still brings you honey in the spring. You didn't plan any of it. You were just there. Hammer in hand. Listening. At sundown, you sit by the open forge, watching the village glow with torchlight and laughter. Somewhere, music plays. Someone is dancing terribly. You don't join. But you smile. Because even if you're not part of the story, your work is. And later, when everyone's gone home, a stranger knocks at your door. Young. Awkward. Holding a broken ring. It snapped, he says. When I dropped it. I was going to ask her tonight. You take it. Heat it. Repair it. Strengthen it, and as you hand it back, you say the words you've said 100 times before, "Go try again. It'll hold this time." You're halfway through rewrapping the grip on an old hammer when someone drops a pouch of coins on your bench. You look up slowly. The man in front of you is tall, red-faced, with eyes that have seen more arguments than winters. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't smile. "My wife says this gate latch is cursed," he says flatly, setting a bent iron hook beside the coin pouch. Says it slammed shut every time she tried to leave the house. Wants me to get a new one before it kills her or the cat. You raise an eyebrow. What do you think? He shrugs. "I think I'd rather fix it than sleep in the shed." And just like that, another piece of iron joins your collection of misunderstood artifacts. Not broken. Not worn. Just unlucky. Mainstream historical fact. In many medieval communities, blacksmiths held an oddly superstitious status. Some thought your forge warded off evil spirits. Others feared the fire and sparks, believing them to be touched by darker forces. You worked with the elements, earth, air, fire, and water. To some, that looked an awful lot like magic. You set to work. The latch isn't cursed. It's just misaligned. You reshape the catch slightly, file off a burr, and heat it until it's pliable. You dip it in the quench bucket and whisper, just for fun, "There. Exorcised." The man doesn't laugh. But he pays without haggling, which is almost the same thing. Quirky tidbit. In some areas, villagers believed blacksmiths could bless or curse objects with a single strike. A nail driven in silence was considered neutral. A nail struck 3 times while muttering could seal fate. You've never claimed to have powers, but you've also never denied it. Mystery pays better than honesty. Today is full of requests like that. A shepherd brings a bell that's been ringing at odd hours. You discover a pebble lodged in the clapper. A midwife arrives with a broken chain she claims was snapping on its own. You replace the links, test it, and quietly slip a charm into the final loop. It's just a washer you've etched with a spiral. It doesn't do anything. But she sleeps easier. That's worth something. Your apprentice watches all of this with wide eyes. He asks, do you think the forge really has power? You don't answer. Not directly. Instead, you take him outside, hand him a horseshoe, and tell him to throw it over his shoulder. He does. It lands in the dirt with a thud. You say, now that house is lucky. He stares. Which house? You smile. Whichever one needed it. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths encouraged these beliefs or merely endured them. In truth, you use whatever keeps the customers coming. If they believe your anvil can trap bad dreams, fine. If they think your tongs can detect lies, even better. Just don't ask for proof. Because the proof is in the comfort people feel when they walk out with something you've made. Later in the evening, a woman stops by with a rusted key. It's to my grandmother's chest, she says. No one's opened it in 20 years. You clean it. Carefully. Slowly. You refile the bit and polish the bow. When you hand it back, she holds it like a secret. Do you think it'll still open? You look her in the eye. It'll open something. That night, as the fire dims, you sit by your workbench surrounded by odds and ends, hooks that never found homes, nails bent into spirals, fragments of locks, key blanks, bell clappers. You keep them not because they're useful, but because they feel charged. Not with energy, but with stories, and when the forge is quiet, when the last customer is gone, and even your apprentice is asleep in a heap of blankets and soot, you reach into the scrap box and pull out a crooked piece of iron. You don't know what it was. Or what it will be. But you heat it anyway, because here in the quiet, in the glow, in the hiss of water and the hush of embers, you are allowed to believe in something, even if it's just the shape of hope. There are two ways a blacksmith dies. One is slow. Tendons fray from years of hammering. Lungs fill with soot. Eyesight fades until you're mistaking a red-hot horseshoe for a cold one. You work until your body says no. Then you work a little longer. And one morning, your apprentice finds you slumped over the anvil, still holding the tongs. The other is fast. And loud. Today feels like the second kind. It starts with a shouting match. A man storms into your forge, face red, sweat soaking through his collar. He throws a shattered blade onto your bench with enough force to make your files jump. You cursed it, he says. Your iron. It broke the day after I left. Split clean in two. You recognize the blade. A short sword. Serviceable. Balanced. Not ceremonial. Not fragile. You made it 4 days ago. Delivered it with your usual care. And now it's in two pieces, like a snapped twig. You ask what happened. He avoids the answer. You ask again. Firmly, bandits, he mutters. Tried to fight them off. You pick up the blade. Examine the break. It wasn't flawed steel. It wasn't a bad quench. It was used wrong. Jammed at the hilt. Torqued sideways. No sword would have survived it. You try to explain. Calmly. He doesn't want calm, mainstream historical fact. Blacksmiths sometimes bore the blame for equipment failure, regardless of circumstance. If a tool broke, it was the smith's fault. If a weapon failed, it was cursed. There were no refunds. Only grudges. And sometimes, there was violence. He raises his voice. Says you're a cheat. Says his cousin warned him about you. Says you're the reason his brother got hurt. Then he reaches for his belt. You move faster, not to fight, but to open the door. Your apprentice sees the motion and runs for help. A farmer and the baker's son show up first. Then the butcher. No one touches the man. They just stand there. Arms crossed. Silent and solid, the angry customer looks around. Snorts. Spits on your floor. Then leaves, quirky tidbit. In some towns, blacksmiths were granted informal protection by their communities. Because when someone can make or break the tools you live by, you don't let strangers push them around. You defend them. Quietly. Firmly. Like family, afterward, the forge feels too loud. Every clang echoes. Every spark feels like it might start something worse. You don't speak. You just work. A hinge repair. A plow edge. A ladle with a cracked bowl. Safe pieces. Familiar ones, your apprentice hovers nearby. Wide-eyed and quiet, you okay? He asks, you nod. But your hand shakes when you lift the tongs. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were feared because of their tools or respected because of their patience. You're not sure anymore. Maybe both. Maybe neither. You remember the first time you got blamed for something that wasn't your fault. A nail that ruined a beam. A bolt that shattered a wagon wheel. You apologized. Replaced them. Learn that in this trade, the truth isn't always worth arguing. But tonight, you think about the man's eyes. The rage. The way his hand hovered over his belt. And you realize something. You could have died in your own shop, so after the fire is banked and the forge is quiet, you lock the door. For the first time in years, you actually use the bolt you forged yourself, then you sit, not because you're tired. But because you're shaken, you wonder who will blame you next. And whether your work will be enough to protect you. Not the tools. Not the iron. But your name. Your place. Your people. You glance at your apprentice, asleep again under the bench. He's curled around a half-made horseshoe like it's a charm. You realize you're not just teaching him to forge. You're teaching him to endure, because if the iron doesn't break, sometimes the smith will, but not today, not yet. You wake to birdsong. For once, not drowned out by hammer blows or coughing or complaints about last week's gate hinge. The forge is quiet. The apprentice is still asleep, face half buried in the wool scraps you told him not to use as a pillow. And the fire? Well, the fire is waiting. It always is. You don't light it immediately, instead, you walk outside. Just for a moment. The village is still. The sun is just clearing the rooftops. Chimney smoke curls lazily into the sky. You lean against the doorway, arms crossed, and listen. Not for danger. Not for orders. Just. The world, inside, everything is just where you left it, tongs lined up like soldiers. Anvil glinting faintly in the dawn. The hammer, your oldest one, rests on the workbench with its handle worn smooth and dark from years of grip. The edges of your forge are lined with stories. Tool racks made from old swords. A quenching barrel that once held apples during a festival. A dent in the far wall from a horseshoe you swore wasn't hot, mainstream historical fact. Most blacksmiths weren't remembered by name. Their work endured, but their identities didn't. They lived. They forged. They died. Their tools were passed to the next hands. No monuments. No songs. Just a hinge that didn't squeak. A blade that didn't bend. You reach for your tools. Not because you need to. But because it feels right. A woman comes by mid-morning. She wants a hook for her lantern. You ask how long it needs to last. She laughs. Long enough to make it through winter. You make her two. One as backup. No charge. Later, your apprentice finally wakes. Rubs his eyes. Looks at the fire, then at you. We starting late today? You shake your head. We're just starting slow. He nods. doesn't question it. He's learning, quirky tidbit. In some villages, retired smiths were considered lucky. People would rub their hammers for good harvests or leave coins on the anvil as offerings. You've always thought that was silly. And yet, this morning, you find a pebble shaped like a heart tucked beside your work stool. You don't ask who left it. You just put it on the shelf with the others. Historians still argue whether blacksmithing was a noble trade or just necessary labor. But as you light the fire again, watching it roar to life one more time, you realize something simple: it doesn't matter how they remember you, it matters that the door swings, that the gate closes, that the lock clicks, that somewhere out there, someone is safer, warmer, or braver because you made something, and that is enough. Wind down, the forge is quiet now. The tools are hung. The fire sleeps beneath a blanket of ash. Outside, the sky has turned that deep shade of velvet blue, with stars poking through like tiny, blinking thoughts. You sit on the stool you carved from a tree stump 10 winters ago. The one that creaks when you lean too far forward. Your hands rest in your lap, still warm from the tongs, still carrying the echo of iron and flame. There's a softness to this moment. The kind you don't notice until everything else stops making noise. You breathe in. The scent of the forge lingers. Charcoal. Oil. The faint sweetness of scorched wool. It's familiar. Like an old coat. Heavy, but yours. The world feels smaller now. Simpler. Just you. The tools. The quiet crackle of embers. A stillness that stretches gently across your shoulders and says, "You've done enough." So you close your eyes, and you let it go. The hammer. The heat. The rush to finish. You allow yourself to drift, like a wisp of smoke escaping into the rafters. Out there, the village sleeps. Doors closed with your latches. Lanterns hanging from your hooks. Children tucked into beds under roofs you helped hold up with nails you made by hand. You are everywhere, and nowhere, and now, it's time to rest.